Today we're going to be covering 4 different warriors for Silver Age, and so to kick it off, we're starting with Fang. Whenever you hit a marked hero, you're going to create a fealty token, and then when you control 3 or more fealty tokens, your dagger attacks cost 1 less to activate. So the whole point of Fang here is that we want to stack 3 fealty, and that way we can use our Obsidian Fire Veins for 0 resources. Mixing this with 0 cost draconic instants or reactions will trigger the effect of the Fire Vein to give it +1 and go again. What this means is that when you have 3 fealty, you can essentially play a pitchless deck. So you can begin to block with your blues or your yellows, turn those into 3 blocks and gain the life defensively, and then play turns where you'll just do something like send a Fire Vein, not pitching a card, play a 0 cost react on it, send your second dagger, play another 0 cost react on it, and you get these really good value turn cycles with this deck. So to facilitate this, we have a lot of draconic cards, draconic reactions, and then ways to mark and generate fealty. So it may actually be easier to start with the non-draconic cards. So cards that I think are worth including are going to be cards like Scar Tissue. This is important because marking our opponent is how we generate fealty. It has some good payoffs, and just having a reaction that's able to mark is really important. You want to be able to pressure this as fast as you can. Another card that I think is worth including is Twist and Turn, where your next dagger attack gets +4. And when it hits, you can attack an additional time with it this turn. When you are online, the additional attack is free, right? So it's just really good value. You can do something like play Twist and Turn, push your dagger over with a Draconic instant or reaction, send it again, play another Draconic instant or reaction, and then send your third dagger. So this is just really good value, and so we're running the full rainbow of this. Cut Deep is just another 0 for 4 go again. And then we have a lot of blues and yellows here. This helps us facilitate turns. We're just going to pitch, send a dagger, play a 0 cost or a 1 cost, and then send our other dagger. More reactions are going to be in packages like Affirm Loyalty, and these all have a mix of marking / fealty payoffs. So for instance, Affirm Loyalty, if it's your second Draconic Link. So if this is the second react that you play, so if you go like send dagger, react on it, send your other dagger, play Affirm Loyalty, you're just going to immediately make a fealty token. But other cards, really like Endear Devotion, Blistering Blade, even Imperial Intent is just perfectly fine. It's just an easy reaction. Searing Gaze will mark. Tooth of the Dragon is a really cool sidestep because let's say your opponent like overblocks for 6 on a dagger swing. Like let's say it's your first dagger. You can play Tooth of the Dragon to give your dagger go again and the +1. And then you kind of just sidestep all the damage and stick it on your second dagger. So this card can really punish blocking really well. Other instants are going to be cards like Pledge Fealty, really good, right? Just makes a fealty token for you. And that's basically it. Everything else here is kind of like utility blue, something you can kind of play every once in a while. Some good power cards though are going to be cards like Fire and Brimstone. This is a legendary, so this is like Wrath of Retribution. This card really works well when you are online because you can do stuff kind of similar to the Twist and Turn, where if your daggers are able to attack additional times, if you have a bunch of Draconic cards in your hand, you can like send an attack, react on it, send it again, react on it, send it again. Like it just scales really well, and you want to have a lot of Draconic cards. So this card can high roll really hard, but it requires you to have the right hand to do it. But in all other cases, it's perfectly serviceable. And then like a really good chain ender is going to be a card like For the Dracais. If you do something like mark your opponent on a dagger swing, so let's say just marks on hit, and then you send the For the Dracais to follow up is really good because not only will you make the fealty, but then when they're hit by this, you're going to make another fealty. So it'll help you spike up to 3 fealty really easily. And then another physical attack that we're running is going to be Blaze Headlong. Just works really well, especially we have some cards that care about the amount of Draconic links you have. Cards like Dynastic Dedication, which are just running the 1-of because you don't really want this all that often, but it's perfectly serviceable as a 1-of every once in a while. So overall, that is the deck. Our sideboard is just including Arcane Polarity, some different kinds of D-reacts, and additional ways to mark your opponent. We're not playing a whole lot of AB because I don't really know if it's super important for the deck, to be honest, but we are trying out Blessing of Vincerikai into fatigue matchups. That way you can sculpt these hands where you can get fealty, and then you can have a turn where you end on an arsenal and play your Blessing of Vincerikai, and then you essentially get to carry this card over as like a +3 into a future turn, and essentially get a 6-card hand. However, I don't really know if you actually need to sculpt like this into fatigue decks, because I think this deck is already posed to be fatigue decks fairly well. You just have a lot of sidestep ability, you have a lot of wide chain links, and you can kind of choose when to push all of your reacts on something. So it could be that you could actually maybe get away running AB3 and just swapping these out, but I wanted to try it. Next up, we have Olympia. Olympia is a very dedicated fatigue style deck in this format. So you're going to win by basically grinding your opponent out of cards. You have a hero text. It doesn't actually matter. We're not going to play any wager cards in this deck. The reason why you play Olympia in this format is because you get access to Prize Galea, which kind of similar to the Betsy conversation from the Guardians. It's just a block 3 headpiece, which is strictly better than what the other warriors would have. So if you were to compare all the warriors together, You could play this exact same deck composition for any of those warriors. The only difference is that Olympia will strictly have one more armor block capability. So I guess that by default makes him the best at the style of game plan. It's such a dumb marginal difference, but things like that in Flesh and Blood really do matter. The fact that you will just have one extra block during a game, and that is relevant. So it's definitely not worth discounting. It seems like we're doing semantics here, but that kind of stuff I think strictly does make him the best at this fatigue style version of the game. So you're playing all Blade Beckoners in the Price Galea. Your Decimator Great Axe is how you're going to win the game. It's just a Guardian Hammer. It's a 3/4 axe. And the first time it's defended by non-equipment cards, their base is halved, rounded up. So like for instance, if they block with a 3 block, it'll get halved down to 1.5, rounded up to 2. This is similar to Lyeth. But this is just really good because it means that decks that want to, like block with a lot of cards into you, like it always kind of leaks over. Like anytime they would put a 3 block in front, if they're going to take 2, this is basically like a 3/5 in essence. And so it's really good in the late game. There is basically nothing really to talk about with this deck, to be honest. Everything here is a marginal 3 block blue that every once in a while you will have the chance to resolve, but for the most part, you are blocking with everything as efficiently as you can. The only exception to this is that if your opponent ever gives you the window, you can play something like Felling Swing, where you just convert this into 6 damage, right? That's pretty good. A 3/6 with go again, so you can kind of try to like race down damage if your opponent takes too long, which is always kind of the tension in these formats, right? Is these fatigue decks, they only need to deal 20 damage to you. So if you just give them a couple off turns, you need to be able to present enough damage that you actually can race pretty quickly. Same goes with Crash Down the Gates. These are just efficient ways to drop your opponent low enough. That way the Decimator Great Axe starts ripping 2 cards every single turn. And your opponent just like can't keep enough cards to actually push over, especially when you're just blocking with everything else. Everything in this deck is like a mixture of a D-React that can be played from Arsenal, which is important. Some damage conversion, but we're being really careful because these take red slots, which is really kind of a difficult thing to do for this deck because we want a lot of blues and we want our blues to be high impact. And then you actually have some generic blocking cards like on the horizon. Our sideboard is a mix of some poppers, some anti-arcane stuff, and then some anti-tall stuff as well with the steel plate shunts. I'm trying to cut down to size because I do think that you need to have some proactive disruption into some of the aggro decks. I think that if you just only send 4 against decks like Fine Briar, they will sculpt hands that will completely run you over. So I'm trying to lean into a little bit more proactive disruption into them. So that way you can actually trade damage in the early game. But overall, this deck is very on rails. It's very simple to play. When we originally covered Boltyn on the channel, we did this for Project Blue. And at the time, NIMBY was legal and we built the deck around it. Now that the card is banned, I think it needs to be reworked a little bit. And so I wanted to reintroduce it in this video. Boltyn uses the light mechanic of charging to your soul. This was very important for 2 different reasons on his hero attacks. Number 1 is that when you charge, your attacks get +1 while they're defended by an attack action card. This is very good because it means that you're naturally presenting a breakpoint, and then it works into his second ability, which is that as an attack reaction, you could remove one of those cards from your soul by banishing it, and then a target attack with power greater than its base gets go again. So you kind of present this interesting thing where whenever you charge, if your opponent ever blocks something that naturally wouldn't have go again with an attack action card and it gets that extra +1, you can then just choose to give it go again. It also means that cards that buff also work really well with Boltyn, cards like Courageous Steel Hand and Nimblism, because if they have the buff, then you can naturally, even if your opponent says no blocks on them, give them that go again. So you can do cool stuff, specifically with cards like Snatch. Give Snatch go again with Boltyn's ability, provided that you have charged a card of your soul and you just have like that secondary resource available. Another really good card is Bolt of Courage, which naturally wouldn't have go again, and it has the same kind of text as Snatch on hit drawing a card. If you find a way to buff this, or your opponent just has to block it with an attack action card, you can then give it go again and potentially play whatever you draw off the top. Everything else in this deck is a way to kind of generate soul for you, or to just have like as good value rates as you can, given the fact you're always like choosing to remove a card from your hand, and Boltyn kind of plays with like Intellect 3 almost, always having to banish something. And Take Flight, I think, is also a really important card for the strategy. Giving itself go again is important. You need to be able to kind of like chain extend in this deck. It also works really well with our weapon choice, which is Beaming Blade, where you can pay 2, and if a yellow card has been put into your Soulless turn, it gets +5. So think about the fact that you could just, with a blue and Take Flight, go send the Take Flight, and naturally let's go again. You charge a yellow card to your soul, and then you can send the Beaming Blade for 5. Some other cards that are worth noting here, I think, are cards like Illuminates, and Express Lightning, just 0 for 4, is that just very cleanly puts stuff in your soul. Boltyn plays very on turn, off turn, where you're gonna have one turn that is almost laughably bad in terms of your overall damage output. You're gonna do things like, 4 card 8s or whatever, because you're gonna just be charging stuff to your soul. But the payoff is that on the falling turn, when you're able to kind of cash everything in and give a bunch of stuff go again, you can do these really powerful explosive turns. Some cards that make the downside of banishing the soul a little bit better is going to be cards like Banneret of Salvation with the Soul Flare mechanic, where when it's charged to your soul, next time you hit this turn, you gain 1. So you kind of mitigate a little bit of the downside of just losing this card to your hero's soul. Same goes for Banneret of Vigor, or whenever it hits, you're going to gain a resource. Another really good payoff for charging is going to be a card like Valiant Thrust, where the red's going to come in as a 1 for 7, and then notably it buffs, which means that even if your opponent doesn't block, you could also choose to give this go again and like send your Beaming Blade afterwards, right? So you can do some really explosive stuff. Coming in as a rare as a specialization, which means we can play in this format, is via the Vanguard. As an additional cost to play this, you can charge your hero soul any number of times. And then your attacks as combat and get +1 for each light card charged this way, which means that naturally you could just play things like Snatch, and it naturally has +1, which means that it's always alive for Boltyn's ability to give it go again. Same with Bolts of Courage. And so if you have cards stored in your soul, you're able to kind of cash them all in on a power turn with V. Our sideboard is going to include some Spell Void, some Radiance, just as another kind of Spell Void style effect, take it on the chin, and Arcane Polarity, very good into the Arcane base decks, and then cut down the size to try to race with the aggro decks a little bit better. To wrap things up here, we have the original Kassai from Crucible of War, Centauri Sellsword, where your second sword attack each turn costs 1 less. And then at the beginning of your end phase, if you've attacked 2 or more times with weapons this turn, create a copper token for each weapon that has hit. So, for instance, at the end of your turn, if you send both sabers and both sabers have hit this turn, you're going to make 2 coppers at the end of your turn. Unfortunately, with no copper payoffs, think about things like cash in or blood on her hands. In my opinion, the original Kassai basically doesn't have a secondary hero text. You almost never want to pay 4 resources to draw a card unless if things are just really dire and you draw 4 blues. I just don't really think that that's actually a hero power that does anything in this format, so we mainly want to evaluate her based on the first part, which is your second sword each turn costs 1 less. Means for this format is that you can get away pitching yellows and doing your normal Kassai things like we've talked about on the channel. We've covered the newer Kassai, so none of this is going to be new playlines. This deck looks basically entirely identical, where you're just going to go ahead and send a Centauri Saber, play your Blade Runner, give it go again, send your second one, and that curves out on 3, right? Because the Centauris each cost 1. What it means is that with the original Kassai's ability, you can do this with a yellow. This didn't really translate to Constructed because the way that this hero played was that what you did with that extra resource from your blue instead was you would activate Brave Forge Bracers and give your next Saber +1, assuming that it had hits. Unfortunately, we don't really have a resource sink, but it does mean that we can sometimes fit an additional, like 1 cost reaction in there, or it means cards like Driving Blade are now playable because Driving Blade with the blue will curve out where you can send your first Saber with the Driving Blade go again, and then you'll have 0 resources floating, but it doesn't matter because your second Saber will come in and it'll cost 0 resources to do so. I think that the newer Kassai, I feel like is a little bit more flexible and powerful to me. You can do things like pop Gallantry Gold immediately if you have like a 1 cost react like Blade Runner. However, you could always do that with Blossom of Spring available to you. So I'm not really quite sure what the angle is here. I think the biggest thing is that this one probably will work better into Icelander because Icelander will always kind of tax you a resource, and this Kassai will always give it back to you. Although the new Kassai, if you're able to draw cards, would just cost reduce anyway to help you pay through that Frostbite in essence. So it's all kind of weird to me, but overall, I want to at least present this because there are a couple cards that are different. Cards like Driving Blade are now more playable in this deck, and you can get away with more 1 cost reacts. Our sideboard is going to be Steelblade Shunt for tall decks, Push Forward against fatigue decks, Arcane Polarity against Arcane, and Cut Down to Size against aggro. Once again, sorry that Talishar was down today and there's no gameplay, but until next time, thank you for watching.